Welcome back to the official YouTube channel of Anastasis Academy. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ananya V. Chatterjee, your VARC mentor. In this series, Maverick Mastery 6, we are going to look at some sentence rearrangement questions today. As you know, these questions are a salient feature in CAT every year. You can expect 2 to 3 questions from this domain itself. So let's look at question number 1. Here goes the first question. The 5 sentences labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 given in this question, when properly sequenced, form a coherent paragraph. Each sentence is labeled with a number. Decide on the proper order of the sentences and key in the sequence of 5 numbers as you answer. So this is a classic CAT theta type question for para-jumbles. Usually you have 4 sentences, but in this question we have 5 sentences. Let's go ahead. Sentence 1. Scientists have for the first time managed to edit genes in a human embryo to repair a genetic mutation, fueling hopes that such procedures may one day be available outside laboratory conditions. 2. The cardiac disease causes sudden death in otherwise healthy young athletes and affects about 1 in 500 people overall. 3. Correcting the mutation in the gene would not only ensure that the child is healthy, but also prevent transmission of the mutation to future generations. 4. It is caused by a mutation in a particular gene and a child will suffer from the condition even if it inherits only 1 copy of the mutated gene. 5. In results announced in Nature this week, must be a magazine, scientists fixed a mutation that thickens the heart muscle, a condition called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So now let us look at the mandatory pairs that we may be able to find here. So when we deal with sentence rearrangement questions, one thing that can really help us is identification of pronouns. So here in the 4th sentence, we see that the pronoun it has been used. The pronoun it. It is caused by a mutation in a particular gene and the child will suffer from the condition. The condition. That means something must have preceded sentence 4. I need a noun which can be referred to as it. Okay. So we are talking about a condition here. 2 is also talking about this condition. If you see, the cardiac disease causes sudden death in otherwise healthy young athletes and affects about 1 in 500 people overall. So 2 and 4, these 2 sentences are making a mandatory pair based on the keywords. So 2 and 4, the cardiac disease causes something, something. So sentence 2 is giving the symptoms and sentence 4 is giving the cause. Now sentence 3 would come. Once the diagnosis is over, then only you're going to talk about the prognosis of the disease, right? So 2, 4 would be followed by 3. If you know what I mean, because 2 and 4 are talking about the symptoms of the disease, right? The causality of the disease. And 3 is talking about the prognosis, how to treat this, how to correct this. So 2, 4, 3 is a triplet. Now we need a decent opening or an introductory sentence for the passage. Going by chronology, you have sentence 1 and 5 left so far. To put things in perspective, I hope you see that 1 is saying for the first time. So if you go by the chronology guideline, 1 will come before 5. And 1 and 5 will make a mandatory pair. How exactly? Scientists have for the first time managed to edit genes in a human embryo to repair a genetic mutation. A genetic mutation. See. fueling hopes that such procedures may one day be available outside laboratory conditions. So we are clearly going to look at this sentence, and we see that the scientists are hoping to include this procedure to treat people elsewhere outside the laboratory conditions. And once they have done this experiment, the results would follow, right? The results. In results announced in Nature this week, scientists fixed a mutation. Must be chronologically something that comes after one. So 1 and 5 is a mandatory pair. Clearly, one would open the passage. 2, 4, 3 is a mandatory triplet. So your sequence becomes 1, 5, 2, 4, 3. 1, 5, 2, 4, 3. That's the sequence for this parajumble question. It was a fairly difficult question, but that's how we should have approached this. So let's get to the second question now. So the second question is talking about traditions. We still have 5 sentences to go, but thankfully these sentences are not as long as the one that we had previously attempted. So let's read the questions one by one. The process of handing down implies not a passive transfer, but some contestation in defining what exactly is to be handed down. So the author is saying that when you hand down something, it is not just a passive transfer that you have taken something and you are giving it away to somebody else, but it is more of a contestation in defining what exactly is to be handed down. So a person reflects on what exactly needs to be handed down. So that's sentence 1. Sentence 2 says, wherever Western scholars have worked on the Indian past, the selection is even more apparent and the inventing of a tradition much more recognizable. So clearly the author is saying that, see, when Western scholars are working on the Indian past, the Indian history, they don't really have the benefit of contextual familiarity. They were not born in India, they were not raised in India, they are probably not very comfortable with the ways of Indian life. So that's the second sentence for you. Third sentence says every generation selects what it requires from the past and makes its innovations some more than other. It's about generational preferences. The fourth sentence says it is now a truism to say that traditions are not handed down unchanged, but are invented. So truism is a concept word. So truism is something that is usually taken as a prevalent notion, accepted and agreed upon by the general populace, you can say, right? So that's the fourth sentence for you. The fifth sentence says, just as life has death as its opposite, so is tradition by default the opposite of innovation. So let us see where we can start the passage. Let's look for mandatory pairs one by one. You see, the most apparent mandatory pair that you can probably see here is 5 and 4, because both the sentences are talking about traditions. If you look carefully, the hints are given right within the question, tradition. So 5 is saying, just as life has death as its opposite, so is tradition by default the opposite of innovation. So we are talking about antithesis, we are talking about antonyms, right? So 5 would open the passage and 4 would follow 5. Why? Because just like you were talking about opposites and antithesis and antagonism here, 4 is saying it is now a truism to say that traditions are not handed down unchanged, but are invented. So you started talking about how traditions are the opposite of innovation, and fourth sentence says that traditions are not handed down unchanged, but they are invented, maybe reinvented, right? So 5, 4, these two are going to go together. Now you're talking about handing down something from generation to generation. Is there another sentence which is talking about the same thing? If you look carefully enough, you will see that sentence 1 does talk about passive transfer, handing down, uh, defining what exactly needs to be handed down. So 4 would make a mandatory pair with 1. 5, 4, 1 would come together. Now that you've talked about the theory part of it, now you are going to talk about where in daily life can you see this being applied to. So sentence 3 is saying every generation selects what it requires from the past and makes its innovation. So then 3, Yeah, select what is required, what it requires from the past. So maybe, just maybe, the traditions and the rituals followed by the previous generation have not been handed down in their original authentic form to us. We also try to stick to those norms and rituals, maybe in our own way, with a little bit of tweaking here, with a little bit of tightening there, with a little bit of innovation here and there. We try to make changes to suit our needs and our belief system, right? So that goes, there goes the third sentence. And then, because you've talked about selections, whenever Western scholars have worked on the Indian past, the selection is even more apparent. So when you say even more apparent, that means you are comparing it to something that has been previously stated. So there must be another sentence wherein selection was apparent. So 3, 2. 3 also talked about selection from generation to generation, and 2 talks about the selection of Western scholars when they're trying to give their perception on the Indian way of life. So 3, 2, 5, 4, 1, 3, 2, that is going to be the sequence for this question. This is a very easy question because, see, there are two very important and relevant guidelines that we would be using here. The first one being general to specific. As you know, we move from the general information to the specific information in the course of parajumble questions. And the second one is that of noun is followed by a pronoun. Okay, so fair enough. I'm not going to start with his, clearly. I'm not going to start with such activities. Such activities must refer to some kind of activities that must have been mentioned before this. So I can start with 4, I can start with 3. 3 would be a better opening because it's a more generalized way. It's introducing the idea of phoenixing. What does it say? It says, deliberate and systematic liquidation of a company to avoid liabilities and then restarting the business is called phoenixing. Right? Phoenix, as you know, in ancient mythology was a bird which was resilient enough to burn itself down to ashes and then reborn as a completely new bird. So phoenixing, it is a classic case of turning a noun into a verb. So systematic liquidation of a company to avoid liabilities and then restarting the business, just like a phoenix does in mythology. It's called, the phenomenon is called phoenixing, right? Now, more about phoenixing in the second sentence. Companies in many countries routinely engage in such activities. What kind of activities? We have already mentioned this in 3. So 3 and 2 are going to make a good mandatory pair. 3, 2. Companies in many countries routinely engage in such activities, which means that the employees are left with unpaid entitlements, right? So they have completely liquidated the company, and now they are starting a new business. And who are the stakeholders that are left high and dry? The employees of the failed companies, right? So 3, 2. Then let's give an example. The Australian minister, why am I taking 4 before 1? Because 1 is saying his. At least 4 is giving me a noun to start with. I will not start with a pronoun, am I right? So the Australian Minister for Revenue and Services discovered in an audit that phoenixing had cost the Australian economy between 2.9 billion and 5.1 billion last year. That's the magnanimity of the situation at present. That means 4 will come just after 2 and 4 will make a mandatory pair with 1. So the Australian minister, here referred as his, it was his taxpayers who had to shell out as much as $1.6 billion over 10 years to employees of failed companies. So the correct sequence in this case would be 3, 2, 4, 1. That brings us to the fourth question. You see, it is a fairly curious question because it doesn't toe the line of normal structure that you see in parajumble questions. Because the opening sentence, if you look carefully, can be nothing but for. Why is it unusual? Because it is starting with a pronoun. It is starting with it. It started with a lump, right? I have to start here thanks to chronology. I have to do justice to the chronological sequence of events. What must have happened first? So, first, the person must have identified the lump on his or her, in this case, her index finger. So, 4, we are starting with 4. It started with a lump on Kathy Perkins' index finger. That's where it started. So, who is Kathy Perkins? More about Kathy Perkins in 2. The viola player, that's a musical instrument. Didn't know what it was, nor did her GP, general practitioner. That's a doctor. Then 1, the eventual diagnosis was skin cancer, and after treatment, all seemed well. 1. Then a routine scan showed it had come back and spread to her lungs. That's 3. It had spread to her lungs. That's 3. So before it can come back, it has to be treated. Logic dictates that before you place a sentence which says it has come back, you should place a sentence which can actually bear testimony to the fact that it went away once. You see? So 4, 2, 1, 3 would be the correct sequence in this context. So that brings us to the last question of this short session. Unlike the first 2 questions, I think this one is an easy one because, well, you have some very obvious and conspicuous connectors. You have but, which is a contrast connector. These people, right? Another group. So let's see what we can do. So we will not start with but, clearly. We will not start with these people. Again, that's a pronoun. So either we start with 2 or we start with 4. 4 seems more like a continuation of 2. So it's not a good idea to start with 4 either. Right? So let's start with 2, which says democracy and high levels of inequality of the kind that have come to characterize the United States are simply incompatible. Why are they incompatible? Because democracy, in essence, is something for which we say that it's for the people, by the people, of the people. And if there is so much power vested in the hands of the people, how can we have a contrasting inequality in terms of wealth, prosperity, access to amenities, so on and so forth? Right. So that is where the incompatibility angle creeps in. So we are starting with 2, wherein we are talking about how democracy and high levels of inequality are fairly incompatible, which has become a salient feature of the economy or the socio-political fabric of the United States. Then we are going to go to 4 because this is talking more about the inequality. Very rich people will always use money to maintain their political and economic power. People who already have the money, in spite of the fact that you're living in a democracy, they will always use money to maintain their political and economic power. You can think about generational advantage here. People who are generationally endowed with intellectual capital, wealth capital, um, social capital, so on and so forth, probably something that can point towards dynasty politics also. The monarchy is gone, but we still have the baby of the monarchy, which is dynasty politics and nepotism, right? So 2 would be followed by 4 clearly. So 4, if you look carefully, is talking about a certain group of people who would not let the power go. Very rich people. 1 would follow 4 because 1 is talking about another group, the unwitting enablers. Unwitting as in not deliberate. These people are not deliberately enabling other people to go and face inequality in the society, but they're unwitting, involuntary, non-deliberate enablers. They probably don't even know that they are the enablers. More about these people in 3, which says believing these people are working for a better world, they are actually at most chipping away at the margins, not really making a dent, let's say, making slight course corrections, right? Ensuring the system goes on as it is uninterrupted. So these people are doing more harm than good. They are helping maintain the status quo of inequality in the name of democracy. You understand that? So 2413 would be the correct sequence of sentences in this particular question. So guys, these were the 4 questions for which I had decided that I would do a guided practice with you. Now I'm giving you 5 questions I discussed with you. Now I would like to give you 5 more questions for you to practice on your own. The answers to these questions would be found in the description box right beneath the video. So this is question number 1. You can pause and attempt the question. Question number 2. Question number 3. Question number 4. And finally, question number 5. Okay, so these are the 5 questions that I would like you to practice and share the answers for. And keep practicing parajumble questions. As I always say, it is not about getting to the right answer right away. It is about learning to find out the mandatory pairs, identifying the keywords, and ensuring that we are working on our cognitive skills. Right? Accuracy is a byproduct of all these things taken together. I hope I'm not sounding too esoteric here, but that is exactly what I believe would help you get better strategy, better time management, better accuracy in the long run. Okay. So let us not be penny wise and pound foolish. Let us keep practicing the transitions and not be disheartened by the accuracy right at the inception, let's say. Okay. That's it from my side. Take good care of yourself and happy learning to all of you.